it looked like Wendy had asked about curing, what that means. Oftentimes what that means is allowing the vegetables skin to sort of harden up so that that then becomes a barrier where less water is lost from the particular vegetable in storage. So onions are one of those that you would want to let them dry out of direct sunlight for about 3 to 7 days, and before putting them into storage. Your winter squashes, I think I mentioned those, allow those to cure for about 10 days in a warm, relatively moist area for those if you can find it. I put in the link to the harvesting and storing fresh garden vegetables. And that talks about curing the squash at 80 to 85 degrees for 10 days with 90 to 95% relative humidity. Your garlic is another one that it's good to harden those off, let those outer skins dry prior to putting into storage. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Jen. So are there any other questions from participants today? You have the option to type that into the question and answer box in the control bar on your screen. So far, we're not having any other questions that are coming in. Let's see. Okay, we do have another question. How about potatoes and curing?
Let me unmute there. So with potatoes, you do want to allow the skin on those tubers to dry and cure. So if you dig your potatoes about 1 to 2 weeks after those tops have died back, and then let me see if there's some specifics on the temperature for curing here. Minimize exposure to light and hold them for 1 to 2 weeks at 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit and 80 to 90% relative humidity for the potatoes.
Thank you, Jen. We have had a couple of questions that have come in. So the first one, Diane asks, my land survey says I have 12 AUM. Is that 1 cow-calf per acre for 12 months?
Actually, that's really close. It means 12 mature cows with calf, assuming you've got 1,000-pound cows. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is most of our cows are heavier than that these days. So you really, it's a little less. If you have a 1,400-pound cow, you can imagine you're going to have to proportionalize that. But what it means is that you can run 12 AUMs per month. Whether you could do 1 cow for 12 months instead of 12 cows for 1 month, did I say that right? That would probably depend on your land. I think you do need to take it literally, 12 AUMs per month. It may be that if you tried to do 1 cow for 12 months on that same piece of land, it would not be quite as productive or productive in a different way. That's a very good question, but it is true that what it means is 12 cows per month on that land.
Thank you, Kate. Todd asks, where did the massive amount of data come from to create the web soil survey?
That's a wonderful question, and my husband just left, so I'm doing my best to be a soil scientist. I don't know if you have seen the hard copy soil surveys that are available. I know they're available in extension offices. They're huge. Each county has this huge database. Maybe Jen wants to weigh in on it as well. But this is just a representative of all the work that the USDA has done to classify nearly each piece of land in the country. I say nearly because Tess actually has some land that was not soil surveyed this way, but they dig pits and they just gather all this data, and it used to be only available in a hard copy until they did this massive work to digitize everything.
Jen, do you want to add anything to Kate's answering of the question?
I don't think so, but I believe that they originally started the soil surveys back in the 50s. Am I correct about that? And
It's actually much older than that. It's more like 100 years ago, I believe.
Okay, so it's the data, they've been collecting the data for a very long time, and that has gone into what we have now.
Yeah, I wish I had that on the tip of my tongue, but if you go to that Web Soil Survey website, there is some history there in more detail that you could find out.
Okay, great, thank you. Diane is asking for a little bit of clarification. She says, I'm still confused. We want to raise smaller Dexter lowline cows. We are thinking we can raise one cow and her calf year-round on our 2 acres. This AUM implies a much larger herd. Can you clarify? Is it 1 cow for 12 months or 12 cows for 1 month?
Okay, I'm sorry if I muddied the waters. If your soils said 12 AUMs, that means you could run 12 cows per acre per month. And now that I'm saying that, what's going through my head is, well, what do they mean by that? Is that the carrying capacity year round, or would that be what you might be able to have during the growing season? I'm not positive on that answer, but I would imagine that you could not run 12 cows just eating that grass all year round. What happens, like if you rent something by the AUM, is you do that during the growing season, and then you have to feed them when it's not the growing season. So I guess I'm not positive on the answer to that, but since you're only interested in raising 1 on 2 acres, you do have way more than you could use. And what I would recommend in order to make the most out of that would be to cross fence it to some degree, so that the animal isn't just, high grading and taking the most, kind of overgrazing in some areas and not grazing in others. You will get a lot more out of your land if you can kind of direct their grazing and have them graze one area more thoroughly and then move on to another and let the other one rest. If you can maybe cross fence it where you have 4 paddocks, you'll be more able to put up hay and maybe run more cattle.
Thanks for that explanation, Kate. And the next session that we have is really looking at livestock, and we can bring that question forward to our presenters and maybe ask them to go into a little more depth about AUMs and how people would use that estimate from the soil survey. We have another question from Brad. Brad asks, can you harvest wheat for grain, in parentheses bread, and straw for mulch?
Yes, yes you can. So if you grow wheat, you traditionally you will just have a combine go through, and it will separate the grain from the chaff, and it'll drop the straw down, and the grain gets hulled and shelled. I'm not using the terms quite right, but there's a separator that takes the grain away from the chaff, and that's what gets collected in the combine. It combines those two actions as it goes along, and the hopper will be full of grain, and then the straw gets dropped onto the ground, spread on the ground. You'll have to go back through and probably rake it and then bale it.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, I will give it just a second to see if there's any other questions that come in.
Yeah, and so Tess is here too from our Master Forest Stewards. And Tess, do you want to describe a little bit why your land is not in the web soil survey, and maybe give us a little teaser toward the next session? I think she's still with us. You're muted. Tess, are you there? You're muted if you're talking.
Muted still?
Now you're back. Okay.
Okay. Well, first of all, I wanted to sort of address Diane's comment. That's a really good question. That is the $64,000 question is, how does the AUM let you do it over a year? And Kate is absolutely right. You have to do a rotational grazing. You're going to hear about that at the next gathering in 2 weeks. But the rotational grazing, you should be able to do one cow with her calf on the 2 acres. But you need to do like a 50 by 100, like a quarter acre, and then the next quarter acre and the next quarter acre. If you do that, your grass will hold out. So back to the thing that you asked about, why I'm not in the soil survey. It's up on the side of a mountain, and it has been a farm since 1949, but somehow it missed the survey. And so the survey stops kind of at my south border, and at the south border is a bunch of forested areas that I can only extrapolate that soil continues on. But since it was farmed since 1949, and it's had a lot of changes in the arrangement of waterways and the arrangement of pasture fences, and put cattle on it in all those years. So I imagine my soil is a little different. So, it's going to take a lot of soil testing. And it never made sense to me to put 25 tests and then throw them together in a bucket. I still am baffled by that, how that could be good. But that's how it's done, I guess.
Yeah, so thank you, Tess, so much. I know I wondered the same thing, and now Gray has taken off, but the idea is that you're getting enough soil and mixing it together within a more or less uniform area. That maybe Jen is our closest thing. Can she describe it a little bit more on that?
Yes, I should say, when you are taking those subsamples that you mix together, the area should be relatively uniform. If you have an area that's dries out more or holds water more, maybe it's on a sloped area, you would want to test that separately. But if it appears that the general field is similar in soils, then you'd want to take several samples from around there, so that you're not just digging in one hole, and if by chance there was a cow patty left there, or there was additional fertilizer that landed in that particular spot, you're not just sampling that, which would be an anomaly to the rest of the field. So that's part of the reason.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay, we have had no other questions that have come in. Oh, and we do have a comment from Chris. Chris says, study the soil types descriptions for inclusions. You can have an inclusion in a mapping area that is as large as 10 acres. Okay, do we have any other comments? Or we have another question. Janelle says, I have a question that is totally out of subject about water collection. Is it allowed to a certain amount? Are there ways to build small ponds for collection?
I would say to check with your local government, whether it's city or county or state, because those regulations may vary based on where you're located. So check to see how much, if any, rain collection is allowed in your area first with those folks. And then for rain collection systems, there's a number of different ideas, whether it's just a simple 55-gallon drum off of a gutter to a larger system, maybe an underground cistern or something where you're collecting it. So there are a lot of different options for that. If you are looking to build a pond, that would have additional regulations for that.
May I comment?
Please.
Yes.
Something am I on?
Yes, you are.
Yes,
Something that I encountered was that it was okay for me to dig the soil out from an area to make a change in the area, but it wasn't okay for me to dig it out and put it just downhill from the hole in order to catch the water because of the kind of plants that grew in the area. And I encountered this when I was working with NRCS, and they saw that I was doing erosion control where a stream went through my pasture. And I said, well, I have to do that. I've got 5 more planned. And they said, yeah, you can take it out and the silt can form in the hole and it can stop the water from, slow the water down so it doesn't cut into the field. But you can't put the soil that you took out of the hole downhill because of the regulations. So as Jen says, check with the regulations because you wouldn't believe some of the crazy stuff that you'll encounter.
But do describe how you went to USDA NRCS to get help with that, because I always think of them as your pond resources.
Yeah, I was not going to them for that. I contacted NRCS originally because I was hoping that they would be able to help me to enhance the forage production on about 5 or 6 of the acres that I have. It just seemed like it was lagging behind the production of the other acreage. And so I was hoping that they would help me, with seed money or advice or whatever. And when they came out to see the farm and see the site, I was giving them sort of the grand tour. And they said, well, what about these ponds? I said, well, they're not really ponds. They're just to slow the water so that it doesn't cut through and take the soil from my good pasture. And that's when they said, well, did you talk to the Army Corps of Engineers? I said, no. It's a 4x5 ditch. It doesn't seem to be an Army Corps of Engineer project. And then they said, well, because you've taken the dirt, the mud out from the ditch and put it downhill of the ditch, making a barrier. And so I was a little bit concerned about that. So I said, well, okay, so I can take the dirt out and make a hole and then the water will fill in and that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. It's very interesting, to deal with the regulations. It's all doable, but you should go in with your eyes open. The other clever thing that I heard from another person who wanted to slow down the water was he dug a ditch about 10 feet or so deep and about 15 feet long, and it was across the fall line of the water going through his field. And then he put bentonite clay in that ditch. So it slowed the water, but it didn't affect the surface. And then he just let it hold back enough water that section of his pasture stayed green, but it was not a pond on the surface. It was just, he changed the subsurface water flow. I thought that was pretty interesting.
I have heard of people using bentonite clay in their ponds. So the NRCS, if you don't know, they are a technical resource. They're not regulatory. So they will provide resources and help. And there are some cost share programs to help you with different water quality, building ponds, sometimes for wildlife, that kind of thing. So do make friends with your USDA service center. The web soil survey is a product of NRCS, but I do know people that have wanted to deal with, create a pond or do some other things to do with their land like that. And NRCS has provided wonderful technical assistance and site visits. So don't be shy about going in there and introducing yourself and asking questions. They can't regulate you. They are just a technical assistance agency.
Yes, that's great. Janelle says thank you. She said that she's gotten some different responses in Kootenai County depending on who she talked to, but she will definitely talk to NRCS, and she's already working with them on some forestry projects.
All right, and I see
Okay.
Todd asked a question. We only average 9-inch a year of precipitation. Is that worth trying to save water? Well, yes, it's even more critical in a 9-inch rainfall to try to save your water. And there is so much that can be done. There's a huge history of people doing things in low rainfall. I know that one producer in our county, Marcia Seymour, she has raised vegetables for our farmers market for 40 years. She does not water her garlic. She does not water her potatoes. She has crops she does not water, and she mulches really heavily. So they get their rainfall during our more rainy season. She mulches them heavily, and she just feels like she gets much higher crops. And it saves her water to go to things that really require a lot of water. But yeah, that would be another question. Maybe we should try to dig up some additional resources on living in such a low rainfall area. I'm sure there are a lot. That's a common problem in the West.
Okay, if you have any other questions, please go ahead and type those in the Q&A box. And so Alicia asks, she said that she would love more information on good rain/irrigation catchment systems for this area.
Okay. This area, as in where is she?
So Alicia, if you could type in, she's in Canyon County.
Wonderful. Okay, we're taking some notes, and the resources. Maybe Colette, you could describe, or Mackenzie, where we will post the resources for this lecture.
The resources will be posted on the webpage on the Cultivating Success website. I think most folks have already been there. That's how they registered for the webinar, and that's where the recordings and the handouts from our first session are listed. So I will include these resources with the recordings from today. That will be posted early next week.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. Colette, do you want to go through the last slide and talk about the survey?
Absolutely. I'm happy
push
to
it.
do that.
Let me just forward this. Okay.
Okay, great. Before we jump into the wrap up and talk about the evaluation, I do want to note that Todd just put into the Q&A box that he would be very interested in resources for best mulch items in Butte County. They have access to pine shavings, but not much of anything else.
Okay, great.
Okay. We want to thank everyone for joining us for today's workshop, and as Mackenzie noted, that the slide handouts and the recording are going to be available from the Cultivating Success website on the 10 Acres and a Dream web page. We do have a really short evaluation for this session, and we would really appreciate your taking that. It will launch when we close this session today. When we stop the webinar, it should launch in your browser. If that does not happen, you will get a reminder email tomorrow telling you again where to find the recordings and the handouts, the other resources for this class, and providing a link to that short evaluation. We really do appreciate your feedback, and that's really important for us, especially in this offering of this program, since it's the first time we have offered it online. So thank you for sharing with us your experience, for being on today, and we really look forward to having you join us for our last session in 2 weeks.